Okay, so let's get into it. Guys, I'm going to share my personal story about how I healed the mother wound and the toxic emotions that stemmed from that wound. So this is the first time that I'm actually telling this part of my story. It's weird being vulnerable because, you have to have the right boundaries. You have to make sure that the things that you're going to share is not going to be triggering. And as we move throughout the story, I will give a trigger warning because I'll be talking about some things that could incite emotions within you that you may need some actual help with, and so you may need to develop some tools to help yourself if you already have those tools in the moment, or you may need to stop watching the video and go and take care of yourself. So I will issue that warning here in just a bit, right before we get started. But the struggle with the mother wound and the toxic emotions that stemmed from that wound, um, it really within me how I defined the negative wound in me and what that looked like. It was a constant or a negative emotional state. I had this constant negative emotional affect. So, the inability to experience joy. So, somebody could have just received the best news in the world and they're sharing that, oh my God, something so amazing just happened. Whatever it is, it doesn't move me. And although I was able to recognize that, man, it doesn't seem like anything gives me joy, I did not know there was an effect of the mother wound and how I had learned to respond to anything, positive or negative. It was this constant, consistent negative way of seeing things, this negative way of responding to things, this negative way of seeing, other people, myself, the world around me. And so that's what I noticed. It was this emotional temperament, if you will, this disposition that created the tendency for me to react in a certain way, that eventually became a part of my personality. And so that started really when I was young, when I was a small child, probably before I was verbal even, because I see pictures of myself. I saw one picture of myself when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and it was already there. Like, I wouldn't look at the camera, I wouldn't smile, I wasn't smiling, and my other sibling was, looking in the camera, smiling, and I just wasn't. You could tell that something was off. I wasn't happy. And so I could tell from a very young age, even by looking at a picture, that something was off. Something was not right. It was that consistent, that temperament, that just I had the tendency to not look at anything and go, wow, I'm so excited about that. So, how did this happen? Through repeated exposure to traumatic events. So, beatings, religious terror, invalidation, um, all of those things, keeping things hidden from me, my mom and my dad, but particularly my mom. My dad was really, he wasn't much of a talker. He wasn't much of a communicator. He didn't really do much to connect. It was just, kind of letting my mom rule the roost, and rule the roost she did. And so that's where it came from. Broken promises. People, saying that I'm going to do things, I'll be there to pick you up at this time. Nowhere to be found. And they would not call you to let you know if they were coming, if they just weren't going to show up, whatever. And that created a lot of anxiety. Are these people going to be there when they say they're going to be there? And of course, the message that was sent to me was no. You'll be lucky if they show up to pick you up from school or whatever. Now, did I know my parents were going to come? Yeah, eventually. But it was just the fact that they knew that we got out of school at a certain time. And yet they were 2, 3 hours late. And there wasn't any attempt to let us know, hey, we'll be there at some point. And so it's those consistent things where you learn not to trust people when they say something. I can't take you at your word. I can't rely on you to show up on time. And so, it just becomes a lens through which I see the rest of the world. If somebody else does that at one time, my response is that, you see, you can't trust anybody. People always say they're going to do something and they never do. And so this creates this real pursuit of perfectionism, to be able to just depend on myself and not to have to rely on someone else because other people aren't reliable. And so now I do want to say, we'll talk a little bit about something that I'm going to get into later, not necessarily in this video, but there is a lot of neurobiology that underlies the experience of trauma, and particularly the mother wound. And in future videos, in some of the upcoming videos, I'm going to talk about what those things are. What is the neurochemistry? What is the brain chemistry, the neural circuitry that gets or dysregulated, such that the brain is wired in a way that it responds in a fight flight manner. And so those things are rooted in early development. And so I do want to eventually talk about the neurobiology of trauma in the mother womb. But we'll get to that, like I said, in subsequent videos. So how did I cope with this early upbringing of lack of trust and physical abuse and all those kinds of things? My biggest one, my response type is fight and freeze. So I primarily, not fight, flight and freeze. I primarily flee. So how I run away from things is I check out, I go numb, I dissociate, I cut people off. That is my primary response type. A freeze, sometimes I will just, kind of become immobilized. It depends on what it is. But I'm primarily a flight type of person. And so knowing that about myself, I knew that that's how I respond. Not just I learned to respond that way to my family, but of course, with trauma, you tend to generalize those responses to everything else. And so it's not just I respond to my mom this way. I learned to respond to everybody in that way, particularly if I was triggered by something that was familiar. And so, that's kind of been the struggle for most of my life until I started the actual healing journey. I started therapy when I was in my 20s, my early 20s, but I did not actually start dealing with the mother wound because I didn't know what the mother wound was until about 2017. I really did. And people say, you were a therapist and you know what the mother wound? I didn't. I didn't know it was called that. I knew that I had mother issues, but I didn't know it was called the mother wound. So, like I said, before I dive in, I want to give a trigger warning. That there are going to be comments. I'm going to make comments. I'm going to talk about things that relate to physical abuse, suicide, repeated traumatic experiences, hopelessness. And so if you are not in a good mental space, I want you to take this time now to really kind of evaluate. Can I bear hearing about physical abuse? As far as I know, there wasn't any sexual abuse in my life. Sometimes I have suspicions, but I don't have any proof. So, but can you bear that? And if you've done enough work where you have some internal and external coping skills that you might be able to use to help yourself, you might have to stop this video. But whatever it is, if you feel like you can get through it, then that's great, because what you want to do is eventually be able to face toward the trauma, meet it head on, and then be able to do the work to get to the other side. But it is a journey. It's not something that you can just snap your finger and say, okay, I want to be done with the mother wound. I want to be done with trauma. Like I said, I've been in therapy for 20 years. Sometimes that's what it takes. But here's the thing that I've learned about being vulnerable. Vulnerability heals when it's done right. When it's done with appropriate boundaries, when it's done with respectful sharing, when it's done with adequate support, so you have a good support system, you can be vulnerable. You can learn to be vulnerable, and be witnessed and be validated in ways that you've never experienced before, because a lot of people with trauma have never had that type of response in terms of them telling their story, being witnessed, being validated, and not having somebody try to give advice to them, try to speak at you. So I first became aware of my mother wound in 2017, like I told you, about 4 years ago, when I was in a support group and I was listening to other women tell their stories about their mother wounds. And I can just remember going, I put my hand over my mouth and I went, oh my God, that's it. So, like I told you before, I knew that I had a toxic relationship with my mom, but I did not know it was called the mother wound. Early on in my life, my mom made me feel, she made it very clear. She made it very clear that she was clearly above me, that I was below her. I was an object to her, not independent of her. She could do whatever she wanted because I belonged to her. Very authoritarian, very controlling. My mom was a batterer. That it's hard for me to say, when I first started talking about the physical abuse that she inflicted on me. It was very, very hard to say that she was actually a batterer. And a lot of times, your mother, a lot of women who have been beaten and abused by their parents, and particularly their mothers, grow up to become either batterers themselves, or they ended up being in battered relationships where they're battered by their partners. And so I didn't experience that, but what I did is I carried the vestiges of that into the rest of my relationships. And so, it's been really hard to really bond with other people. And that's taken so much work, because underlying that inability to bond, or that unwillingness to bond, is the lack of trust. You can't trust people. You just can't. People don't do what they say they're going to do. People will hurt you. They will take away your dignity. They'll do anything they can to save face and make themselves look better. And so when you have that kind of foundation, it's just not, you can't expect somebody to just trust you, and it's hard. It's hard on relationships. And so, I'd always had the symptoms, like I said, but I just didn't know that I particularly suffered from the mother wound. And once I actually started doing the work, I realized, oh, damn, I'm really angry with my mom. Like, there was a lot of bitterness. I wouldn't say that I ever hated my mom. Because, as I continued to do the work, I realized that, she had her own mother wound. That doesn't let her off the hook. She still hurt me. She still damaged me. She still injured me. But somebody without the capacity to even see that they're inflicting harm on you, and let alone the capacity to say, I need to do something to heal myself. When people don't have that, I mean, you can spin your wheels and keep saying, I wish this would happen. I wish my mom could get on, just understand what she did to me. But guess what? That is never going to happen, because she's not doing the work. What do you expect it to just become magic? And for her to all of a sudden become this insightful person and realize the error of her ways? I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So you have to be willing to do the work once you become aware. And so for me, the awareness came in that support group. And then the shift came when I started acknowledging, when I said out loud, my mom was a batterer. She hurt me. And I hear this all the time from other women that I talk to about the mother wound. Here comes the guilt. Here comes the shame. How dare you talk to about your mama like that? She gave you life. She was doing the best she could. That just seems really selfish. That seems really ungrateful for you to come out and to be talking about your mother. She did her best. And it's like, she didn't do her best. She didn't do her best. And I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying, I'm stating the facts. She did not do her best, because beating somebody and mocking them while you're beating them is not doing your best. I mean, I still can't fathom how you think that's okay. My mom would beat and beat and beat and beat. I don't know how long I got beat, but every time I got a beating by my mom, I knew it was going to be a long one. And I knew by the end of it, I was going to be out of breath. I knew I was going to be begging for my life. And I knew she was going to be mocking me while she was beating me. That's what I was sure of. And so don't tell me somebody who's doing that to a child. And this is when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. Somebody's doing that to a child, they're not doing their best. I'm not letting her off the hook, and neither should you. So, there was all of that. Now, the work that I did, the road to transformation is what I call it, is I had to first create safety, because I grew up in a very unsafe environment, a very distrusting environment, a very dysfunctional environment. And so, of course, you're not going to feel safe. I had all of the symptoms of PTSD, hypervigilance, flashbacks, night terrors, avoidance, re-experiencing the intrusive memories. And so to be able to start the healing process, you have to feel and be safe. And I didn't have that. So how am I going to trust another human being when I don't even feel safe? I don't know. And number one, I don't even know you. At least I knew my mom. Creating safety requires, as I said in the last video, repetitive experiences that build healthy attachment behavior. Because remember, the mother wound is an attachment injury. It's an attachment wound where you have not been able to build a secure attachment system because of exposure to repeated traumatic abuses. And, some people may not have necessarily had a lot of trauma, but there was neglect, there was abandonment, and that's trauma. That can be traumatizing, but at least creates a wound. And so I had to do that. I had to create this safety. It came through joining a support group, through joining other women who had had a similar experience. And just a little bit of it at a time. How I was able to start to build trust is that seeing if I can rely on somebody to show up. Okay, you say you're going to be there at 7 o'clock to pick me up, or you're going to meet me at 10 o'clock at the coffee shop, or we're going to meet at this restaurant at this time. Let's see if you're going to keep your word. And so being able to trust that I can rely on somebody to keep their word, that can rely on somebody to show up, that started to create a different dynamic that I wasn't necessarily used to. And so, at first I was like, okay, can I trust this? Is this too good to be true? But over time, and this took me years. I didn't just come around in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. This took me a few years to really see that this is different. There are people in this world who will show up, who will keep their word. And if they can't make a commitment, or if they can't be somewhere they say they're going to be, they call you, they tell you. And it's usually not 20 minutes before. It's a couple of days before. Or they send you a text, a day or two and say, listen, I know that we were going to set up this meeting, but can we reschedule for another time? What's the most convenient time for you? And then when we do that, they keep that commitment. They don't keep canceling. They don't keep, saying, oh, I can't make that one either. Because then, how can I trust you? I can't. And so I'm not going to waste my time. So, the only way I could build consistency and reliability and safety of leaning on those healthy, reliable relationships was really knowing myself, knowing my trigger responses, knowing, how how my body and my mind works in relation to interacting with other people, and knowing that I could trust others to show up within reason and to follow through. That is how I laid that foundation. And once that foundation was established, I was able to feel safe enough to start then peeling back the onion. And peeling back the onion is me letting my guard down, taking down those safeguards, and starting really talking about the hard stuff and doing the grieving. And I think this is where a lot of people say, the pain is too much. I can't actually face the pain. It's just too much for me to acknowledge, to accept. And so, once that happens, then you move back into a realm where you start rationalizing. Well, she was this way and she had her own wound, and you start talking about how she did her best and all that kind of stuff. And that's really the alternative. If you don't face the trauma, if you don't face the wound and acknowledge, I suffered this injury and I'm going to speak my truth. And once you create that safety and everything, and you have that foundation where you can start peeling back the onion, letting those safeguards down, it can be hard. You can have that sense of that urge to want to tuck tail and run. But I always tell people, I would rather for you just to stop for a couple of days and just engage in your internal and your external coping tools that you've built when you were creating safety. So these can be mindfulness meditation, they can be journaling, they can be, creating art, whatever it is, leaning on your support system. But you need to be able to return to that if you are feeling that urge to tuck tail and run. Because if you tuck tail and you run and you never face it, you're not going to get to the other side. Healing trauma and healing the mother wound, it's a very hard thing. And it's not easy. If it were easy, I think everybody would be doing it. But really being aware that you have a mother wound and knowing what you have to do. Because this isn't just about you saying, okay, woosah, I'm healed or whatever. This is about telling the truth. And you're going to talk to some people about this truth, and some people aren't going to like it, specifically if it is family members, because to them, that's a sign of betrayal. You don't do that. And so, listen, I want to get healed. And so if I got to tell the truth and lose some people along the way, then that's just the way it is. Okay. And so what happened was I started telling my story and deconstructing the narrative that kept me stuck in the mother wound. And instead of constantly focusing on why I'm so damaged and why my mom's not here, I just started saying, listen, I'm my own person now. I have control of how my life moves from here on out. I may not be able to figure out what the exact path is going to be, but I know that I don't want to live the way that I grew up. And so I've got to do the work. If I want to heal, if I want a different life, I've got to do the work. I'm not going to carry this guilt. I'm not going to carry this shame. I'm not going to carry this fear with me any longer. I'm done. And so each time I said that, each time I acknowledged the wound and spoke my truth, I was chipping away at that mother wound, chipping away at that emotional cycle that maintained that trauma narrative, that inner critic, and that kept me stuck, kept me feeling worthless, kept me feeling invaluable, unlovable. I broke that cycle. I broke that emotional cycle. I'm not tied to that anymore. I unchained myself from that wound. And when I did, there was still a hole. There was a gap that I had to fill, but I had to figure it out. And I did that by saying, like I told you, creating that safety, leaning on support. And as I was doing the work, I was able to return to what you call a secure base. So in attachment theory, there is what you call proximity seeking. There is the next level of a safe haven, and then there is the sort of completed circle of that secure base. So humans are hardwired to seek safety, and those initial safety seeking moments or years rather are in our primary caregiver relationships. And if we are met with hostility, we're met with anger and all these kinds of things, we're gonna figure out pretty quick that it's not safe to trust these people. So we're not gonna build that safe haven where we can cry and somebody's gonna say, "It's okay, it's okay. Let's take some deep breaths together. Let's figure out how to calm our little nervous system." That's You're not gonna have that kind of safe haven. And so if that safe haven, that foundation is not built, you're not going to have a secure base to return to. So you're not going to be confident to explore your surroundings. You're not going to be curious about what's around you because you got to stay safe. If I do something that they don't like, I might get hurt. And so you're not going to be safe enough to explore. And so you're not going to have, when you do want to go out and test something, you're going to say, well, there's nobody to support me. I don't have any help. So I can't do this. And so part of healing is building that healthy attachment system where you have proximity seeking, you have that safe haven and that secure base to return to when you experience distress and you need to talk to somebody, you need to lean on somebody. That's the part where where that support system comes in. And part of that is also developing what I call an intentionality plan, where you actually review that with an accountability partner. So what is your plan to keep your promise to yourself, to maintain health and healing, to maintain a life that you want to create, that you created for yourself out of this trauma? And so that can include self-care, getting rest, joining community. It could be, having fun, doing the things that you've always wanted to do, taking care of your spiritual self through mindfulness, meditation, if you pray, whatever it is, connecting with nature, having that plan. How do you keep your promise to yourself to not relapse back into those old protections, those old wounds? Because the triggers are always there. They don't ever go away. Somebody may look like my mom. They may say something that my mom would have said. And I was like, ooh, I remember my mama used to say that. It really made me mad. And instead of me allowing that to bother me, I just say, well, that's not how I live my life no more. So, yay, that's up to you if you want to do that. And then, so you lean on that support, and then you create the desired life that you want. Construct the life that reflects the way that you want to live, that reflects your desires, that reflects those interests. The things you never maybe even got to do because you were trying to survive or you were busy surviving. My life, primarily when I started out, it was about getting back at my mom, showing her that she didn't control me anymore. But that's not freedom. That's you digging a hole deeper for yourself because you're mad, because you're upset, because your mom wasn't like the other people's moms who provided a nurturing, caring relationship. Well, whether you're mad or whether you're not, you're not going to get your mom to do it. So you got to make a decision. You need to become the mother that you need. You need to be the one who says, I'm going to break this cycle and pass on a positive parenting legacy to my children so that they can be healthy and pass it on to their children. And so we can break this cycle and never come back to this again. So that was really it. I unlearned that emotional cycle that perpetuated those painful behaviors. If you can unlearn it, because what trauma is, what the mother wound is, it comes from you learning to respond in a particular way because someone mistreated you over and over and over again. So if you can learn that, you can unlearn it, but it's going to require that repetitive over and over and over again of learning the right way to get your attachment needs met. And so, guys, that's my story. That is called doing the work. My toxic emotions were rooted in complex trauma, and particularly the mother wound. How my mom taught me to see the world, how she taught me to respond to the world, how she taught me my value or the lack thereof. And so I had to not only become aware of it, but I had to acknowledge that this is something that I wanted to change. And once I did that, the sky was the limit. So, like I said, guys, if you want to contact me, if the story resonated with you, just contact me on Instagram, Facebook, email, and we will be back next week with our full production, our fully creative and edited videos, the ones that you were used to seeing before. We had to kind of make some changes here temporarily, but we are back. And so I will see you all next week. Bye.